Okay, welcome everyone. I see a lot of you have joined, started typing messages in the chat box. So just want to say welcome. We'll probably have a few more people joining as we get going, but I think we have a fairly packed agenda, so we want to kind of get moving here. So again, welcome and thank you for joining. You've probably noticed that you're on mute. So when everybody joins, they're automatically muted, and that's just to keep the background noise down. And also, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. The idea is that we can share the webinar with all owners, so that the folks that couldn't join today will be able to see this as well. And of course, you'll be able to go back and watch it again if you would like. This is a little bit of an experiment. This is the first time we've done an online town hall here at Lighthouse Point. So we'll definitely be keen to get your feedback on how it worked. And maybe we'll get a survey out to folks to just see if you have any feedback for how we can improve it in the future. The format for today is pretty simple. We're going to have a bit of a presentation, work through a few slides, and we'll follow that up with question and answer. In terms of how you ask questions, we're going to invite you to use the chat box that some of you have already started to use. The chat box is something that I think appears in the bottom of your screen, and hopefully it's fairly straightforward to use and see people's questions. And maybe just to test it out, I'm going to ask people if they can introduce themselves. So just maybe share your name and perhaps how long you've been living at Lighthouse Point. So perhaps we'll just give you all a minute to type that into the chat box, and we'll just test that everyone can find it okay. While folks are doing that, I've noticed someone's scribbling on the screen, having fun with the different tools in the webinar system here. I think I can erase those scribbles on the screen, but just so you know, when you're trying something out, everybody can see it. Okay, I got them all, I think. Thank you. Okay, that's great. Lots of people introducing themselves. So while we're doing that, I will introduce the folks that are here with me in the room that are going to talk to some of these slides. So in the room with me are process committee members. So we have John Brown, who is the SFC Vice Chair, Shared Facilities Vice Chair. Ingrid McLeod-Dick, who's the SFC Treasurer. And myself, and I'm just newly appointed as the SFC Chair. I also want to acknowledge the important role of two of the other process committee members, Frida Tomofte, who's the Secretary for SFC, and of course Miles Thompson, who is the past Chair and really instrumental in kind of getting the ball rolling on this process. And of course, I want to thank Cameron and his property management team for all of the support they provided through this whole process. So thanks to those folks. And so you'll be hearing from John, Ingrid, and myself as we work through some of these slides. So hopefully everybody now is familiar with the technology. You've had a chance to use the chat and introduce yourselves. And we're going to start off with just a quick couple of polls here. All right, so hopefully this has popped up on your screen. So the first poll we want you to answer is, have you been involved in a community strategic planning process in the past? So hopefully you're seeing this and you can click on either yes, no, or not sure. Or maybe you can't see it because I'm not sure that I've launched it yet. Just bear with me 1 second. Lost my cursor, there we go. All right, here we go. I think the poll should have appeared now. Okay, so the first question, have you been involved in a community strategic planning process in the past? Okay, we can see the numbers rolling in here. It's quite exciting. Some people already started answering question number 2, so you're stepping ahead. We'll accelerate this webinar by answering 2 questions at once. Okay, so a couple of people. Oh, there we go, a few more. Okay, and numbers are rapidly changing, but what I'm noticing is a fewer number of people involved in community strategic planning processes, but quite a few people, more than 2/3, have been involved in other strategic planning processes. So for a business or nonprofit, and they're fairly similar processes. So that's good. So there's a fair amount of experience with strategic planning, which is great. Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks for testing out that tool. It's all going well so far, touch wood. So I think without further ado, I will pass the controls over now to John.
Sure.
I will continue to control, but you will speak.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And we'll start into the slides here. Okay, so, oh yeah, I've already said all that and that, but we're going to start here. So,
okay,
John, maybe we'll switch spots here so
sure.
people can hear you.
Okay, so thank you, Tim. So good evening, everybody. It's great that you've taken the time to join us to, I guess, hopefully be informed about our strategic planning process. So the slide you'll see is a picture of Town Hall, and the title is Community-Based Strategic Plans. So I don't know if you know or not, but I was the Chief Administrative Officer for the town of Collingwood for the last 5 years, and we did a community-based strategic plan while I was there. And what the community-based means is that it was inclusive of all of the community. We made strenuous efforts to reach out to the broad public and the stakeholders of Collingwood to make sure that they realized there was an opportunity for them to express to the politicians and the staff at Town Hall what their interests were, their aspirations for the future of the town, and within a process which mirrors quite closely the one we were embarked on at Lighthouse Point, a strategic plan was developed. And of interest, in the last election, virtually all of the candidates in their position taking and election campaigns reflected very strongly the aspirations that the community articulated in the approved strategic plan. So that's I guess one example of how strategic planning can influence organizations, because the new council really is committed to the continuing implementation of what the community decided its future was in the strategic plan. So that's just one element of the background. So really, what is strategic planning? So according to the survey we have just undertaken, a lot of you have a pretty good idea of strategic planning, but bear with me for those that don't. So what is a strategic plan? Essentially, it's a forward-looking document and process. And it is kind of iterative in nature, and it outlines where an organization wants to be in the future and identifies strategies as to how to get there. Also, it provides a roadmap for success. It helps organizations to focus and, very importantly, to prioritize, because we don't have unlimited resources. In fact, we have scarce resources, and establishing priorities is one of the most significant opportunities a strategic planning process offers. Strategic planning is undertaken in a number of steps. And the first one is an evaluation of current situation within the organization. And that ties into the surveying process that we have undertaken, and we had a fantastic response rate to. It also picks up what we're doing tonight, and it picks up what we'll be doing when we have the town hall meeting. So it's very important that we evaluate the current situation, and we need the input of everybody who's impacted to share their perceptions and understandings with us. It also includes the definition of goals and outcomes to achieve how we improve our situation. And what that means is how we address the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities, and particularly the threats that exist for Lighthouse Point in the future. And generically for strategic planning, most organizations follow a very similar process. And you have to be very cognizant of what awaits you in the future to see if you can understand the threats that might be on the horizon and make plans and strategies to try to avoid those. And then thirdly, there's a determination of the path of how we achieve our planned future. And I'll be talking about that in more detail later on. So essentially, it's an ongoing process. It isn't an end state. There isn't a plan that's going to be developed that sits there. This is an ongoing, continuous process. And perhaps, you know, tying back into the community strategic planning concept that the town undertook, strategic planning has to be inclusive of all of the stakeholders in an organization in identifying those weaknesses, opportunities, constraints that I just mentioned for the future. So then to turn to the question of why are we undertaking a strategic plan at Lighthouse Point? Lighthouse Point needs a strategic plan to provide this community the direction that we need to take, and which needs to be outlined, and we need to develop and prioritize the actions necessary for us to get to that desired future state that we want to exist here. So we need a strategic plan, in essence, to be a successful organization in achieving our desired future. So engaging the Lighthouse Point community specifically. You will recall that in the summer, all Lighthouse Point owners were sent an electronic survey to seek their input into the strategic plan. The survey received a very impressive 370 responses, and there were multiple choice questions and provided the opportunity for literally thousands of comments to be provided by the owners. And over the fall, the process committee, which Tim has already outlined, analyzed the data and compiled the responses to identify what were the key and predominant things. And this is an important concept that we need to understand. You know, there's 370 responses. There's obviously people who really comment positively on one issue and very negatively. The comments are from other people. So we can't deal with individual comments. The strategic planning process looks for predominant issues, the ones that are shared by, you know, most of the people. So that's an important concept. So that's where we are in the process. So a document was shared with Lighthouse Point owners summarizing these themes and issues, and really is the basis for this presentation and discussion, hopefully, that we're going to have tonight. Okay, just so that you're aware that we aren't sitting back waiting for a process to be completed before we take any action. There are a number of specific actions that have already been undertaken and initiated, which respond to some of the feedback that we received, and of course are part of the implementation of the plan. So the first one, which is a very significant one, the Lighthouse Point's reputation, that question was posed, and overwhelmingly the response was highly positive. If you look at the bar chart and that you see, the green yes bar is very striking in its predominance, and that's very comforting for all of us who live here. Virtually everybody here really likes it. And then the question is, what is it that creates that positive impression? And the people who filled the survey and shared with us some common themes that, in their opinion, contributed heavily to this image. And they were grounds, the grounds, the trees, the walkways that surround this property are included in the property, the waterfront, which we all, you know, I in particular think is absolutely fantastic, the location, the community, the sense of community we have here, and of course the very significant amenities which this this community is blessed with. So, however, everything isn't positive, and there were a number of very specific concerns that we distilled out of all of the comments, around which there was heavy predominance. And these included the following: affordability. I would say virtually every response noted that concerns related to rising condo fees. And this has been a particularly bad year for rising fees. However, most people said this is of great concern, and that's been taken under advisement. The second one was landscaping and grounds, and there was a strong support for the improvement and maintenance, and that was mentioned by many people. Security was an issue, and we sense that the concerns with the security are focused perhaps more on outside people having access to Lighthouse Point, because I think, and Tim's going to, I think, later on tell you that many people will be very safe themselves personally in Lighthouse Point. Short-term rentals was a very significant issue, and in my own chatting with friends that we've got in Lighthouse Point, this comes up, all the time, the issue of short-term rentals, and particularly Airbnbs at Lighthouse. And that's something that has been heavily recognized, and we'll talk about that later on. Communications and transparency. A number of comments suggested that shared facilities, in particular, the decisions and the operations of this upper tier committee has limited transparency and owner input, and that was a strong concern. All organizations have rules, and those rules need to be enforced. And concerns were expressed that our rules perhaps were not being effectively enforced, and we'll come back to that. And of course, the facilities, the amenities that we have in the facilities, there were concerns that they're aging and that there is a need for updating and better maintenance than has been the case in the past. So that concludes this element. At the end, I understand there's going to be questions. So if you have anything that I've talked about, I'd be happy to try and address them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And we're going to pass over to Ingrid. Ingrid, are you going to stay seated where you are? Okay, we'll move this around and move the computer around here.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to just give you some highlights of the information we gathered concerning the amenities and services. And as we highlighted in the slide here, the amenity that was used the most by everybody, appreciated the most, was the most important, was the walking paths. And I think that goes back to why a lot of us live here. We have nice grounds, we've got beautiful trees, we've got a lovely waterfront, and most of us are using the walking path. So that was the number one amenity. The second amenity used and most important to people was the community center. And then that was followed by the pools, both the indoor and the outdoor pools, and then the fitness center. And with these 5 amenities, there was common trends across all the questions that we asked. They were ranked as the most important. They were the most used by people on a weekly basis, and they were also rated as being the best quality. Just following those top 5, the West Beach, the bay swimming area off the end of the pier, and the tennis courts were the next amenities that were used the most often. Then out of these questions, we were also able to identify what amenities were used the least, were least important, and of course they also ranked as the poorest quality. And these were the mini putt, the putting green, and the volleyball court. Just some other items that were part of that was also, no, those are probably the main 3 of poorest quality and least used. And then we had a lot of comments around suggestions and improvements. And one area of improvement that came out loud and clear was the East Beach. It's not used very much. A lot of people identified that it was of poor quality, but there were lots of suggestions on what could be done at the East Beach, including just cleaning up the beach, perhaps building a beach volleyball court, and just making that whole area a lot more useful. So there was a lot of comments around that particular area. Other suggestions for new amenities were the off-leash dog park. That was the highest, that had the highest number of comments on new amenities, and a community garden and a fire pit, all sort of to be used in that East Beach area. And then a final amenity that came up quite often was to have kayak racks also at the West Beach. So that was sort of an overall summary of the amenities. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the services. Oh, sorry. And which amenities to remove. That ties very much into the amenities that are least used by people and are also of the poorest quality. And that was, again, the mini putt, the putting green, and the volleyball court. So a lot of common trends across those three questions. Now, with respect to services, here we were trying to get an idea of where services could be improved. And the three common areas were gardens, the trees, and security. And we'll be talking a little bit later tonight about how we hope to address the concerns in these particular areas. There was also comments that owners are concerned that we are not getting good value for money in these areas. When we asked the question, would you be willing to pay more for fees in this area? Predominantly the answer was no. That question was really answered no increase or decrease in fees. We're fine with the amount of fees that are currently being spent in these particular areas. So we will be trying to work to improve these particular services, but keeping in line the costs. Okay, and then the next big area was security, and as we already mentioned, many people felt that security was that Lighthouse Point is a safe place to live. However, we didn't get a clear consensus as to whether we should increase the security or whether we should decrease the security. And again, we'll be giving you some suggestions on how we plan to deal with that particular question. Okay, I think I'll put it over to Tim then to carry on with the money part.
The baton passes back to me. Just as a reminder, if you want to ask questions, you don't necessarily have to hold them till the end. You can type them into the chat box at any time, and we'll pick them up once we get to the discussion part. So in case you forget them as you're going along, feel free to type them in. Okay, so a big item, as John has already mentioned, in terms of concerns was around rising condo fees and affordability. And there were lots of comments at multiple points in the survey around this as an element of concern. So we did have a specific question around sort of future fees to kind of get a temperature from the community, what would be acceptable. And then, so when asked about how owners feel in terms of addressing rising costs as the property ages, recognizing obviously the challenges of an aging property, the majority of responses indicated there was a willingness to pay modest increases annually, or even potentially through periodic special assessments, as long as, and this was the key, as long as the quality of services and amenities are maintained at a high level. And comments certainly reiterated that the modest increases were predicated on the idea that services and amenities would stay high. And you can see in the chart below how these numbers played out. You know, the top one, relatively few people said they wouldn't want to pay any more condo fees. and were fine with some reduction in quality of services or amenities. A higher number were comfortable with condo fees increasing at the level of inflation. And the largest percentage said they were comfortable with maintaining a high level of quality in services and paying reasonable annual increases to achieve that. Annual increases up to 5% as a maximum. And then the other percentage there relates to the idea of periodic special assessments rather than significant increases in monthly condo fees. So this is really helpful feedback as we look to the future around how we plan financially and the kind of condo fees that owners would see as reasonable to maintain the quality of services and amenities at Lighthouse Point. So the next area in the survey we wanted to highlight was just around communications. So we had some good feedback here around what's working. So nearly 60% of owners are indicating that they're using the Lighthouse Point website, which is a good percentage. And I think it's also an area potentially that we can grow and increase the number of people that are using the website as a point of reference. A number of comments that came through in the survey said a regular newsletter, regular newsletter related to shared facilities business would be helpful. And then when asked if owners feel well informed, and John touched on this already in terms of owner concerns, many owners indicated they felt quite well informed by property management, but they didn't feel that Shared Facilities Committee was communicating very well and that there was a lack of transparency in how decisions were being made. And there were a number of suggestions for improved communications. And these included posting and sharing SFC minutes with owners, an annual general meeting for SFC, just as you would have for your corporation, allowing owners to attend SFC meetings, and SFC annual reports or newsletters. So it's a number of really good suggestions. We'll come back to those. And the other thing is more than 2/3 of owners indicated they'd be interested in attending a town hall hosted by SFC and pertaining to the strategic planning process. So it's great to have a good number of folks on this online town hall. The plan is also to have an in-person town hall meeting in the spring when folks come back from their winter holidays here in the community center. So it's good to see the appetite from owners for that kind of engagement. Okay, the next item to just convey information on is around social activities. In the last survey, actually, that was done for owners, which was specifically around kind of communications, one of the things that came through really strongly was this idea or sense that we could be building a stronger sense of community at Lighthouse Point. And it's been good to see a number of social activities and events really building since then. I think that was about 3 or 4 years ago. And clearly there was a strong appetite because events such as the concerts, the summer dinner dance, the annual barbecue, and the New Year's Eve party are being very well attended. And there are many owners that indicated they would also like to attend these things. So the social activities at Lighthouse Point are really increasing that sense of community. There's also a lot of different activities available, and they're being well attended, such as yoga, Pilates, aquafit, tennis, and pickleball. And many owners that are not already involved indicated their real interest in attending these activities, as well as interest from a number of owners around organized activities for children. So another area of potential progress that can be made at Lighthouse Point, but really good to see that owners are already engaging in a lot of these different events and activities. Okay, so the final sort of slide related to what came out of the survey is around LHP demographics. So at the end of the survey, as many of you will be aware because you completed it, there was a kind of a mini census just to get a sense of who's living at Lighthouse Point. And what was quite interesting was that compared to previous surveys, as I mentioned, there was one about 3 years ago and another one I think that's maybe 6 or 7 years old. It's fairly clear that LHP's demographics are shifting. So what we're seeing is the community at Lighthouse Point is actually aging a bit, and there are now more permanent residents at Lighthouse Point than ever before. So this is really suggesting that we've got an increasing number of owners that are choosing Lighthouse Point for retirement and starting to move up here on a more permanent basis. So maybe folks have had weekend homes or holiday homes up here, but now they're seeing it as their permanent residence. So that's quite interesting and useful information, again, as we begin to think about planning for the future. Okay, so I think that's all from me now, and I'll hand you back over to the capable hands of John Brown here. So John, over to you.
Compliments, unbelievable. Anyway, just to kind of finish off then. So the question is, having heard all of this and all of these issues and concerns identified, what are our next steps? So what I'd like to do is to go back to the concerns that were expressed earlier and give a sense of what we've already started to do to change or address some of those. So the first one is affordability. So the Shared Facilities Finance Committee will be developing a financial strategy together with policies which will respond to the owner's concerns and their desire to maintain quality amenities and services. And of course, the comment that there is strong concern about the increase in condo fees will be borne in mind, and that will be something the Finance Committee will be following up and developing policies with respect to. The second one is landscaping and grounds. So a task force has been established, and volunteers are going to be sought to undertake a review of what needs to be done and to develop a 5-year strategy for their improvement, again, within the context of financial sustainability. And the third one was security. A task force is going to be established to provide advice on our security needs, and they will obviously take into account all of the diverse opinions expressed on this particular subject. With regard to the problematic issue of short-term rentals, the town of Collingwood has its own policies with respect to short-term rentals, and contact is being made with the clerk's department who are responsible for bylaw enforcement, and we will be working with them to see if we can develop an approach which can address to some extent the difficulties we've been experiencing. Airbnbs are a problem, I guess, everywhere, it seems these days, and they're particularly difficult to deal with, but there's a major concern, and we will be addressing that. In terms of communication and transparency, changes are already being made to provide more information to residents, as already been noted, including the posting of minutes of meetings on the website. Other opportunities are being explored by the communications committees, and we will advise you as they're developed. So in terms of rules enforcement, this is something that will become part of our strategic planning process, and there will be a policy paper or a response to that developed. And finally, facilities maintenance. We're going to be developing a strategy to maintain our highly valuable capital assets, consistent with the whole concept of reserve study processes and taking into account our financial situation. So you can see that while the concerns have been expressed, we've noted, we're communicating them tonight, we've already initiated a variety of action so that we can get this plan implemented. So in addition to those next steps, we will be preparing a strategic planning document, and that would probably happen after our town hall meeting, when we can kind of take a final read of the community, and then we conclude on establishing specific goals, strategic action plans, and implementation timelines, so we all can track our success and moving from where we are right now to where we want to be. I've already mentioned the Spring Owners Town Hall, and I think that's a huge opportunity. This seems to be very heavily supported, and I would encourage everybody to come out and attend that meeting in person. So our strategic planning process, we don't have consultants that we can hire and spend money on that can do all the work for us. There's a small bunch of volunteers, and we envisage task forces from within the community of people who are interested, or people perhaps with specific experience in areas, for instance, security, volunteering and participating on these task forces so that the benefit of our own expertise can be brought forward in a cost-effective way, and everybody can help move this process forward together. And I would go back to the fact that, you know, we did find out that a lot of people want to be involved and they want to communicate and they want to be part of this whole strategic planning process, which is a huge compliment, I guess, to what we are doing here. So anyway, the last sentence is very important. We encourage your interest to continue, and we encourage you to become involved wherever you can identify an opportunity that you think you might be able to do that. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, John and Ingrid, and I hope that information was helpful for everyone. We have a good amount of time left here, so I encourage you to start putting your questions into the chat box, and we'll begin to start to address those. So I'm just going to go back to some questions that were posed a little earlier. So the first question was the 370 responses by unit, or were there several responses from the same unit? That's a really good question. The way the survey technology was set up was to allow one response per computer, but that obviously means there's the potential for a household that has more than one computer to submit more than one response. So yeah, I would say it's possible that some of those responses may have come from the same unit. It's really hard to know, but certainly possible. Okay, here's a question here related to the rental rules. I'd like to know why our bylaw has rental rules that do not coincide with the town bylaw of a minimum of 30 days for any short-term rental. And I believe that we are actually aligning our rules with the town bylaw to address that fact. So that's actually, I think, has either happened or is in process.
Lighthouse Point rules were written before the town bylaw.
Right.
Yeah, but the town is predominant, right?
Yes.
So they're predominant.
Okay, so a couple of comments from here. You can hear Cameron Mitchell in the background that our bylaws were developed before the town had put their bylaws in place. Obviously, the municipal bylaw takes precedence over ours, but we're also aligning ours to basically reflect or mirror that town bylaw. Okay, and that, another question here was related to Airbnb. What is the specific plan to stop Airbnb? John, I don't know if you have a comment on it.
Yeah, Airbnbs are almost a worldwide problem. It's a very significant trend where I guess people can rent out rooms and get revenue, and that affects the entertainment, that affects the hotel business, and it also affects government revenues because, you know, people don't generally pay tax. It's extremely hard to control. But what we thought might be a good idea is to work with the town. They have got bylaw enforcement, a bylaw enforcement section. There are three people in it, I think, and so they can only do so much. But if there was, we think it might be a good idea to develop a paper which would enable people who are bothered by Airbnbs or suspect that there are short-term rentals close to them, that they could document the situation and then take that documentation to the town, who could more easily enforce it, as opposed to telling the town, we suspect there's a problem here, can you come out and solve it for us? Because I know for a fact, you know, having been the CEO there, that the town just does not have the resources to enforce all of its bylaws. So I think by working together with the town, we may be able to provide a tool that will enable us to at least start to impact this very, very difficult situation.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Another question around how many owners wanted an open SFC meeting, and that's a good question, and I don't think we had specific statistics, but that's something that came up in comments. And so there were a number of comments that suggested that, and that's one of the reasons why it's one of the takeaways in terms of potential ways to make SFC more transparent, and something that the SFC and the strategic planning group will be looking at. Another question about short-term rentals. Has a specific date been set for the open town hall in the spring? I don't believe we have a specific date yet. I think we're looking at May, probably May or early June, trying to time it for when people come back, when snowbirds come back from the south. Okay, God, that's great. Lots of great questions coming in here. Under security, can we include or consider road safety? This is certainly an issue that's had some conversation recently around the SFC table, looking to develop a bit of a plan to increase road safety, looking at a variety of different techniques to do that. And I think that might fit under some of the conversation of the security, things like speed bumps and lines for the stop signs, so people are stopping before the line and not after. Okay, just looking for other comments. Okay, there's one comment here that this process is long overdue. I applaud the efforts and hope more owners become involved in task forces and implementation teams. We certainly echo that. We're really excited with the amount of owner interest, and definitely want to encourage owners to get involved as opportunities come about. And as John mentioned, there are a number of task forces being developed to really drive a lot of these strategic priorities forward. And you will see those emails come into your inbox asking for volunteers to sit on those task forces. There is definitely a lot of concern around Airbnbs. Another question here with regards to Airbnb advertisements and how these are being addressed. I don't know, Cameron, if there's a specific way we can get advertisements taken down or things like that, but certainly something that we can further explore.
Sure, we contact owners when we feel that there's inappropriate ads.
Yeah, management does indeed contact owners when there are inappropriate ads. I think sometimes the challenge is knowing whether it's on for longer than, the month, 30 days. There are, you can post on both Airbnb and VRBO and still exceed the 30 days that's under the bylaw. Okay, yeah, a lot of comments around Airbnb, so that's really useful to know. That's a concern to a lot of people.
All right, more.
SFC meetings could be webinared as well. That's not a terrible idea. As you can tell, we are starting to try and use technology a little bit more to engage, and it's a little bit baby steps, but certainly we can look at other ways to engage owners around SFC meetings. Just trying to see if there are any other questions here. Here's a comment that just came in. If 99% of the people feel safe living here and we're using a fob system to access amenities, it appears that security concerns are about people using our waterfront pass. If we stop spending money on the current security system, perhaps we could put that money into the grounds and other items that people wanted. And yeah, that's a really interesting comment. It sort of reflects some of that lack of consensus that we saw through the comments. Some people felt that we didn't have enough security at Lighthouse Point, and other people felt that we had too much for what we need. And I think what we're hoping the security task force will be able to look at is what are the exact problems we're trying to address as related to security, and what is the best way to do that. And I think the general sense from the survey is our current security approach is not necessarily addressing the problems that people are raising. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there are any other comments or questions. Not seeing any other comments at this point. Okay, all right, well, we may have reached the end of the questions. Thank you everyone for submitting those questions and comments. Some really good additional information here, I think, that we can take back into the strategic planning process. And again, just want to encourage everybody to stay in the loop. We'll be sending more information out. We'll be setting up that spring town hall and requesting for volunteers for the different task forces that were mentioned. So more to come, and we definitely want this to be an inclusive process. So appreciate you taking the time this evening to join. As mentioned, this was being recorded, so we'll send this out to all owners, and if there's something that you missed or you want to go back to, you'll be able to check it out on the recording. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and have a very pleasant evening. And if you're in Collingwood, it's quite the winter wonderland out there, so enjoy and be safe.
Take care.
Bye-bye.